In the quiet moments between dusk and the deep, unbroken night, there exists a subtle current, a vibration that hums through every interaction, every glance, every fleeting thought. It is here, in this liminal space, that the phenomenon of energy parasitism begins to reveal itself. To live within a world that is not solely physical but resonant with invisible forces is to be perpetually exposed to siphons of vitality that operate silently, almost imperceptibly. These energy parasites are neither myth nor metaphor alone. They are the unseen leeches of our consciousness, feeding upon the subtle threads that connect us to our own power, our clarity, and our joy. Imagine a sun that shines brightly yet is gradually dimmed by shadows creeping from the edges of perception. These shadows are not external in the conventional sense. They are woven from the interactions, attitudes, and presences of those around us, from the environmental dissonance that surrounds our homes and workplaces, and from the very patterns of thought that we inherit or adopt without scrutiny. Each whisper of judgment, each unspoken manipulation, each tiny coil of resentment becomes a conduit through which energy drains, a quiet erosion of the inner reservoir that fuels creativity, intention, and presence. The process is not abrupt but cumulative, and therein lies its insidious nature. By the time awareness dawns, the vitality that once felt inexhaustible now seems like a distant echo, a memory of the self that was vibrant and sovereign. Yet, paradoxically, this depletion carries within it the seed of awakening. Recognizing the subtle leaching is the first act of reclaiming agency. The human spirit, at its core, possesses an intrinsic magnetism for awareness. Even when entangled in webs of influence, there is always a flicker of recognition, a quiet tug toward liberation. Energy parasitism, in this sense, is not a curse to be endured, but a phenomenon to be understood. A mirror reflecting where boundaries are porous, where discernment is suspended, and where the sacred current of our inner life are being redirected. To name the drainers is not to vilify them, but to illuminate the unseen architecture of relational and environmental dynamics, revealing the pathways through which vitality flows and can be reclaimed. Consider the analogy of a river obstructed by debris. The water does not cease to move, but its flow is disrupted, diverted, and weakened. Stones, branches, and hidden undercurrents shape the course of the river without ever halting it completely. Similarly, energy parasites are the obstructions within the relational, mental, and emotional river of our lives. They do not annihilate our essence, but they fragment it, dispersing our attention, diluting our presence, and redirecting our energies toward patterns that may feel exhausting, repetitive, or joyless. Yet, just as a river can be cleared and restored to its natural vitality, so too can a human energetic field be liberated, recalibrated, and aligned with its inherent potency. What makes this topic particularly urgent is the subtlety with which parasitic dynamics operate. Unlike overt threats that provoke instinctual defense, these energy drains are often embedded within familiar forms. The overly critical colleague whose dissatisfaction feels contagious, the friend who monopolizes attention without reciprocity, the relentless chatter of social media that mines our attention as commodity. Even within oneself, patterns of self-judgment, doubt, and internalized fear act as conduits through which energy leaks away. The challenge, then, is not merely external. It is holistic, encompassing the body, mind, and spirit, demanding both keen observation and profound introspection. And yet, there is a promise interwoven with this revelation. Understanding energy parasitism is not a mere defensive strategy. It is an invitation into sovereignty, a doorway into a life where vitality is preserved, consciously directed, and amplified. The act of breaking free is not an act of hostility, but of alignment, a realignment with the natural flow of life that pulses through all living beings. It is a reclamation of time, attention, and inner resonance, a restoration of the self to a state unencumbered by invisible leeches. To recognize the mechanisms of energy drainage is, ultimately, to participate in a profound transmutation. What was once subtle depletion becomes an opportunity for empowerment, discernment, and luminous presence. As we embark on this exploration, it is essential to suspend conventional notions of energy as abstract or mystical. Energy in this context is a lived experience of vitality, the felt sense of being alive, attuned, and responsive to one's environment. It is a spark of creativity that ignites a project, the quiet confidence that carries a conversation, the subtle attunement that allows empathy and joy to flow naturally. Every human being possesses this core reservoir, but it is neither infinite nor invulnerable. Awareness of energy parasites is thus an act of stewardship, tending to the subtle body, cultivating discernment, and learning the art of setting boundaries that preserve rather than diminish. In the sections to follow, we will delve into the architecture of energy parasitism, tracing the invisible currents that siphon vitality, uncovering the archetypal forms they assume, and exploring practical methods for liberation. The journey is both intimate and expansive, a traversal from the personal to the cosmic, from the familiar dynamics of daily life to profound, unseen laws that govern the circulation of vitality in human systems. This is not a simple guide. It is a map of awareness, a reflective odyssey into the structures of energy and influence that shape the rhythm of existence itself. In recognizing the forces that drain, we gain the wisdom to redirect, protect, and flourish. Understanding energy parasites is, therefore, a revelation not of fear, but of empowerment. It is an invitation to reclaim the vitality that is rightfully ours, to step into the luminous space of conscious presence, where life is not merely endured but fully experienced. The subtle currents of depletion are pervasive, yet they are never absolute, and within their recognition lies the power to dissolve them. Through discernment, practice, and reflection, one can navigate a world rich with both challenge and beauty, without surrendering the sacred light within. To understand the architecture of energy parasites, one must first perceive the universe not merely as a collection of tangible objects and measurable phenomena, but as a lattice of interwoven energies, subtle yet potent, shaping the texture of experience. Every thought, every emotion, every interaction pulses with vibration, and in this vibrational landscape, some currents harmonize with the natural flow, while others act as drains, siphoning the lifeblood of consciousness from those unaware of their presence. The first core theme, then, is awareness. The realization that life is not a passive unfolding but a field of exchange, where energy is constantly given, taken, and transformed, often in ways that elude ordinary perception. To awaken to this reality is to begin seeing the hidden patterns behind the fatigue, the agitation, the inexplicable malaise that seems to follow certain environments or relationships. Illusion and attachment form another central pillar. Energy parasites thrive in the spaces where discernment is clouded by habitual attachment to approval, to validation, to fear, or the relentless pursuit of transient pleasure. In these spaces, consciousness becomes porous. The more one clings to external markers of identity or significance, the more easily the subtle leeches embed themselves within the fabric of one's awareness. Here lies a paradoxical truth. Liberation from energetic depletion requires letting go of the very fixations that appear to sustain us. It is a release of expectation, of unconscious obligation, of compulsion to react, that fortifies the energetic self against depletion. One begins to understand that it is not only the overtly toxic presences that drain us, but also the unnoticed patterns of internal contraction, the habitual ruminations, the rehearsed resentments, and the compulsive comparisons that act as conduits for energetic loss. Another theme emerges from the notion of resonance. Energy responds to frequency. Just as a tuning fork vibrates in harmony with a corresponding note, our presence attracts currents that mirror our inner state. When a mind is anxious, scattered, or resentful, it creates an energetic signature that draws in situations and individuals aligned with that vibration, often in the form of subtle parasitic interactions. Conversely, when the inner landscape is calm, alert, and sovereign, the field becomes resistant to intrusion, naturally repelling those who seek to siphon vitality. Understanding this principle allows one to shift the perspective from a victim of circumstance to an active participant in the orchestration of one's energetic ecology. It illuminates why two individuals can occupy the same environment yet experience it entirely differently. One becomes drained while the other moves through it with relative ease. Boundaries, both subtle and overt, are inseparable from the themes of awareness and resonance. Setting boundaries is often perceived as a moral or relational act, but at the energetic level, it is an act of preservation. Boundaries create a field of integrity, a delineation between what belongs to the self and what is borrowed, absorbed, or projected by others. This concept extends beyond human interaction. It encompasses environments saturated with noise, obligation, and emotional debris, as well as patterns of thought that perpetuate self-doubt or scarcity. Energy parasites exploit permeable boundaries, not by malicious intent alone, but because the human system, like any living organism, naturally exchanges energy, strengthening the permeability selectively, allowing nourishing flows while filtering invasive currents, becomes both an art and a science, a continuous tuning of perception and action. The interplay of observation and reflection forms a final thematic axis in this conceptual framework. Energy parasites do not act in isolation. They exist within a relational field, interdependent with the structures of attention and awareness. By observing the subtle depletion, the moments when fatigue descends inexplicably, when joy dims, when patience frays, we map the topography of influence, recognizing patterns that once seemed random as intentional or predictable. Reflection transforms experience into insight, allowing the identification of recurring dynamics, certain people, media, environments, or even habitual thought loops that consistently drain energy. The act of reflection, therefore, is not passive rumination, but a strategic discernment that reveals the invisible architecture of energetic exchange. It is through this lens that one can begin to reconstruct the inner landscape, reconfiguring pathways of attention, intention, and vitality to minimize loss and maximize alignment with the authentic self. Embedded within these core concepts is a recognition that energy parasites are both external and internal, that they exist in forms ranging from overt manipulation to the subtler currents of expectation, judgment, and distraction. They are the shadows cast by every interaction, amplified by unconscious patterns that we perpetuate. Awareness, detachment, resonance, boundaries, and reflective observation are not abstract ideals, but practical instruments. Each one a lever that, when applied with intention, allows the reclamation of vitality. The process is not instantaneous. It is iterative, a continual cultivation of presence and discernment, a deepening attunement to the flows that nourish and the currents that deplete. In this context, energy parasitism ceases to be merely a problem to solve and becomes a field of study, a landscape of subtle dynamics whose mastery aligns the individual not only with personal well-being, but with the natural harmonics of life itself. To understand the mechanisms is to wield power, not in coercion, but in sovereignty. The conscious orchestration of one's energy, the preservation of clarity, and the deliberate opening to influences that enrich rather than diminish. It is a path that demands courage, vigilance, and humility, for the forces at play are often invisible, interwoven with the very fabric of social and mental existence. Yet, in embracing these principles, one moves beyond mere survival. One steps into a realm where vitality is consciously cultivated, where attention is a resource, and where the cell becomes a luminous node within a vast network of interconnected energies. In the quiet corridors of the imagination, the phenomenon of energy parasitism can be observed not merely as a psychological or physiological fact, but as a tale told in symbols, allegories, and the deep language of the soul. Imagine a great forest, vast and luminous, each tree pulsing with sap that carries not only nourishment but the memory of countless seasons. The forest is alive, each leaf trembling with a song of sun and rain, of growth and decay. Within this forest lurk creatures unseen, their forms shifting with the shadows. These are the energy parasites, entities that feed not upon flesh or leaf alone, but upon the very vitality of the forest itself. They attach themselves to the roots of trees that have grown unaware, their tendrils siphoning the life that might otherwise sustain blossoms and fruit. Those trees that are aware, whose roots dig deep into the rich soil of presence and self-knowledge, are less easily consumed. They learn to sense the touch of a leech, to feel the tremor of a siphon, and they respond, bending their growth around it, diverting their energy back into the canopy, back into the life that belongs to them. Consider the story of a river, winding through valleys and plains, carrying water that nourishes every life along its banks. For a time, the river flows freely, unimpeded, until the shadowy beings of the wetlands discover it. They emerge not as monstrous forms, but as subtle distortions in the water, algae that coat the surface, currents that divert into hidden channels, silent pressures that slow the flow without ever halting it entirely. The river, once vibrant and self-assertive, finds its movement impeded, yet the river is not passive. By learning to perceive the subtle drag, by cultivating awareness of its own momentum, it clears blockages, shifts its course, and continues to reach the ocean. In this narrative, the river is consciousness itself, and the parasitic forces are the hidden frictions of life, relationships that sap joy, thoughts that anchor the mind in fear, habits that pull attention outward while vitality leaks inward. Another allegory is that of a city of lanterns, each one a sphere of light representing an individual's energy. In the city, some lanterns burn brightly, their glow unwavering. Others flicker, dimmed by invisible shadows. The shadows are drawn to the light, circling in patterns that mimic the architecture of desire and need. They do not destroy the light outright, but they drain it slowly, leaving the lanterns flickering with anxiety or exhaustion. The lanterns that learn to shimmer without clinging, that maintain their illumination while resisting the pull of shadows, shine undiminished. They discover that the shadows themselves are not inherently malevolent. They only exist because the boundaries of light have been softened, because attention and intention have been surrendered to distraction, to expectation, or to attachment. Through this, one perceives profound truth. Parasitism is not always an act of cruelty, but often a mirror reflecting the permeability of the self, the willingness to surrender vitality unconsciously. The allegory extends further to a field of crystals, each one resonating with its own frequency. Some crystals are vibrant and clear, others clouded and fractured. Invisible threads of resonance stretch across the field, connecting each crystal to its neighbors. When a crystal vibrates with authenticity and self-awareness, it harmonizes with the field, radiating energy outward. Yet a fractured crystal, open to interference, can draw the resonance away, siphoning not through malice but through the alignment of vibration. Here the lesson is subtler still. Energy parasites operate on frequency, not on judgment or force. The field of consciousness is a network of resonance, and those who cultivate clarity and integrity in their own vibration reduce the capacity for parasitic intrusion. Mastery, then, is both a protective act and a creative one, shaping the flow of life toward expansion and coherence. Even the mythic archetype of the trickster illuminates this truth. The trickster does not always steal overtly, yet it misdirects, distracts, and confuses, leading the unprepared traveler into circuits of fatigue, anxiety, and misallocation of attention. One might think the trickster external, yet often dwells within, manifesting as habitual thought patterns, impulsive reactions, or the small but persistent judgments that pull the mind away from presence. Recognition of the trickster is not confrontation alone. It is engagement through awareness, through discernment of which impulses to follow and which to observe without feeding. In this narrative, energy parasitism becomes not only a study of external depletion, but a reflection of the inner terrain, a mirror of the pathways through which life energy is allowed to escape. These symbolic narratives converge upon a single insight. Energy parasitism is woven into the fabric of existence as both challenge and teacher. It manifests externally in relationships, environments, and circumstances, but is inseparable from internal patterns, attachments, and unobserved habits. The forest, the river, the city of lanterns, the field of crystals, and the trickster all converge to reveal that freedom is not achieved through avoidance alone, but through perception, alignment, and deliberate cultivation of vitality. In the symbols, one sees the patterns that elude mere reason, the currents that pull unnoticed, the pressures that erode subtly, and the invisible fields in which life energy circulates, both nourishing and draining. These stories offer the lens through which the mundane becomes luminous, through which exhaustion is seen as a signpost, and through which liberation emerges not as an external conquest, but as an inner mastery of the subtle laws that govern energy exchange. Having wandered through the allegorical forests, rivers, and cities of light, the question naturally arises: how do these symbolic truths translate into the tangible world in which you awaken each day, sip your morning coffee, navigate the chatter of screens, and negotiate the subtle pressures of human interaction? Energy parasitism, while poetic in narrative, is profoundly practical. It is a silent architecture behind the fatigue, distraction, and emotional depletion that many accept as the cost of living. The bridge between understanding and mastery lies in cultivating presence, perception, and deliberate allocation of one's attention and vitality. In daily life, energy parasites appear not always as individuals with ill intent, but as situations and dynamics that systematically draw your focus, patience, or enthusiasm without reciprocity. A colleague who incessantly complains, a relationship that demands emotional labor beyond its nourishment, or a digital environment designed to fragment attention, all function as conduits of parasitic influence. The first step in integration is recognition. to see the subtle bleedings of your energy, the moments in which your vitality diminishes without clear cause, to feel the drag in your chest or the dulling of motivation. Awareness is not judgment. It is acknowledgement of reality. Without this recognition, efforts to protect oneself are like fortifying walls against a storm that is already inside the home. Once recognized, the next layer is discernment, the capacity to differentiate between engagement that aligns with your purpose and engagement that merely distracts or drains. Here, one begins to observe patterns, which conversations, commitments, or environments amplify your energy, and which diminish it. The metaphors of the Lantern City and the crystal field illuminate this process. By mapping your interactions and responsibilities, you cultivate a resonance map, noting where your frequency is supported, where it is neutral, and where it is eroded. The practice is subtle, iterative, and requires humility. Not all parasitic influence is intentional, nor is it always external. Frequently, the inner critic, the habitual pattern of worry, or the compulsive attachment to outcomes serves as a conduit for energy leakage. Recognizing and interrupting these patterns is as essential as managing external interactions. Boundaries emerge naturally from this awareness. Just as trees in the forest redirect the flow of sap to protect their vitality, humans must cultivate the ability to say no, to withdraw attention, to disengage gracefully. Boundaries are not walls to isolate the self from life, but channels to maintain the coherence of energy while still participating fully. They are the gates that allow nourishment in and allow parasitic influence only where it serves higher purpose. The practical application is tangible. Establishing time for reflection, selectively engaging in relationships, moderating exposure to media, and preserving moments of solitude. In these spaces, energy regenerates, like sunlight on leaves or clear water in a river, reinforcing resilience and clarity. The symbolic language also underscores the principle of proactive cultivation. The lanterns that shine brightest do not merely resist shadows. They feed their own flame. Likewise, in everyday life, one must engage in practices that replenish and amplify energy, movement that awakens the body without depleting it, thought practices that sharpen discernment, meditative pauses that restore presence and connection with sources of joy, creativity, or purpose that feel expansive rather than coercive. These practices are not indulgent. They are essential calibration, aligning one's internal field with life's rhythms. They allow the body and mind to operate as coherent systems, rather than scattered conduits for external demands. Importantly, practical integration also entails the courage to confront habitual complicity. Many individuals unconsciously provide channels for parasitic drainage by overextending, by prioritizing obligation over vitality, or by failing to notice the cumulative effect of subtle interactions. By becoming aware of these tendencies, one exercises agency, reclaiming authority over the allocation of attention and energy. This is not about control in a rigid sense, but about the conscious stewardship of life force, the deliberate navigation of currents that influence mood, focus, and resilience. Each choice to withdraw from depletion, to focus on alignment, to invest in what strengthens vitality, compounds over time, creating an increasingly stable and luminous inner terrain. Finally, one discovers a relational dimension of energy mastery. As the river clears blockages and the forest redirects sap, so too can one influence others not through coercion, but through presence, clarity, and coherence. People naturally gravitate towards sources of vitality, and by maintaining your own energy integrity, you create a field that encourages reciprocity rather than depletion. In effect, breaking free from parasitic influence is both protective and generative. It shields your own vitality while creating conditions in which healthy exchange can flourish. Energy becomes not a scarce resource to guard jealously, but a living currency flowing intelligently, consciously, and harmoniously. Through consistent practice, recognition, discernment, boundary setting, self-cultivation, and relational coherence, the lessons of forest, river, and lantern crystal manifest in lived experience. Fatigue that once seemed unavoidable becomes a signal to observe and correct, rather than a normal state of being. Distraction gives way to focus, erosion of attention to deliberate engagement. And in this integration, the mystical narrative of Energy Parasites is revealed as a practical guide, offering a blueprint not only for personal sustainability, but for the cultivation of clarity, joy, and resilient purpose in a world of subtle drains and constant stimuli. As the currents of this exploration converge, one perceives a pattern both elegant and unavoidable. Life is a network of exchanges, a vast tapestry in which energy flows, weaves, and occasionally leaks into forms unseen. Energy parasites, once thought merely metaphorical or esoteric, reveal themselves as the invisible architects of fatigue, distraction, and misalignment. They are neither inherently evil nor consciously cruel. They are the natural consequence of imbalance, a mirror reflecting the places where attention, vitality, and presence are scattered or surrendered. Recognizing this is not resignation. It is awakening to the hidden architecture that structures human experience, a call to inhabit one's own field with awareness, integrity, and courage. The liberation offered by this recognition is profound. To understand the subtle drains is to reclaim sovereignty over one's own internal terrain. It is a realization that the forces which once seemed to pull one in every direction are, in truth, contingent upon consent. Consent given by habit, by unexamined thought, by patterns repeated through time. Once illuminated, these patterns can be consciously disrupted. By tending to one's own vitality, by cultivating practices that nourish and restore, and by consciously choosing which interactions to sustain and which to release, one begins to orchestrate an inner symphony rather than simply endure cacophony imposed by external and internal currents. Transformation, however, is not a single act, but a continuous dialogue with life itself. Boundaries, presence, and regenerative practices must be observed and adjusted as the seasons of existence shift. There will be moments when attention is stolen, when emotions are drawn into maelstrom, when energy feels scarce, and the parasitic forces feel relentless. Yet, within each of these moments lies the opportunity for conscious recalibration. The lanterns that illuminate the night are not static. They flicker, they demand tending, they require return to source. Similarly, your vitality is a dynamic, living system, and mastery is not about permanence, but about ongoing attunement. Consider the wider implications. A single individual who maintains energy integrity does more than preserve personal vitality. They alter the environment around them. Presence becomes magnetic, coherence contagious, and subtle resonance reshapes the relational ecosystem. When one's energy is directed with clarity, compassion, and purpose, it naturally encourages reciprocity, collaboration, and mutual respect. The world itself is not drained by parasitic influence alone. It is drained by the unseen channels of scattered human attention. By reclaiming one's own field, one contributes to a subtle, cumulative restoration of the collective energetic landscape. The liberation from parasitic influence is therefore both intensely personal and quietly universal. This text, Energy Parasites, How They Drain You Every Day and How to Break Free, does more than diagnose an existential phenomenon. It provides a roadmap for awakening. The metaphorical forests, rivers, and lantern cities are not mere literary flourishes. They are mirrors of lived experience. In them, the reader discovers the mechanisms of drainage, the cycles of depletion, and most importantly, the pathways to restoration. Every choice to disengage from depletion, every moment dedicated to self-renewal, every instance of discerned attention acts as a reinforcement of the inner matrix of vitality. One begins to see life not as a battlefield where energy is stolen, but as a terrain where it can be directed, amplified, and harmonized. Yet the deepest call lies beyond technique or strategy. It is an invitation to consciousness itself. To be awake is to notice where the subtle pulls occur, to witness without being compulsively dragged, and to cultivate a relationship with life that honors the sacred currency of attention and vitality. The ancient metaphors remind us that energy, like water or light, seeks balance and coherence. In practicing awareness, cultivating boundaries, and engaging in regenerative disciplines, one does not merely survive the parasitic currents. They are transcended. The practitioner moves into a field of expanded clarity, where vitality is accessible, focus is sharpened, and purpose resonates with precision. In closing, consider this. The world will always contain sources of subtle or overt depletion, whether human, systemic, or internal. Yet, freedom is neither abstract nor distant. It is immediate and tangible. It begins in the conscious stewardship of one's own energy, the deliberate cultivation of presence, and a willingness to release patterns and attachments that erode vitality. Through this integration, the mystical and practical converge. The lanterns of awareness, the rivers of restored energy, the crystalline clarity of aligned attention. They are not distant ideals, but live realities, available to those who choose to perceive and act. The journey is neither simple nor linear, but it is real, achievable, and transformative. May this understanding inspire you to observe your own field with tenderness, to nurture your vitality with devotion, and to reclaim the currents of your life and the hidden forces that have quietly siphoned your energy. May you awaken to the freedom that lies not in controlling others, but in mastering the luminous terrain within. Every breath, every choice, every conscious act becomes a stroke in the living painting of presence, vitality, and expansive being. In the quiet practice of energy stewardship, the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary, and life itself becomes a medium through which consciousness radiates, unbound and radiant. With eyes open and awareness attuned, one steps into this world not as a passive recipient of drain, but as an architect of vitality, a cultivator of resonance, and a guardian of one's own luminous field. The energy that once seemed vulnerable, fleeting, and at the mercy of others becomes a wellspring of power, clarity, and harmony. And in this reclamation, life itself, in all its subtlety and grandeur, can be experienced as it was meant to be, full, vibrant, and unencumbered.